The morning sun was just starting to peek over the trees when Coach Robinson pulled into the empty parking lot of Lincoln High School. It was 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday, and most people were still sleeping in their warm beds. But for him, this was just another weekend morning. Football season was in full swing, and the team had practice scheduled for 8 a.m. sharp. He grabbed his coffee cup from the dashboard and took a sip of the now lukewarm drink. 8 years he had been doing this same routine. 8 years of early Saturday mornings, 8 years of turning teenage boys into young men, 8 years of being more than just a coach to his players. He was a mentor, a father figure to some, and a pillar in this tight-knit community. The school looked peaceful in the morning light. The red brick building stood tall and proud, with its green lawns perfectly trimmed by the maintenance crew. This was his second home, really. He knew every corner of this place, every shortcut through the hallways, every squeaky door that needed fixing. The janitor always left the side gate unlocked for him on practice days, just like they had arranged. Years ago, as he walked toward the equipment shed, his keys jingling in his hand, Coach Robinson thought about today's practice. The team had lost their last game by just 3 points, and he could see the disappointment in his players' eyes. Today was about building them back up, reminding them that one loss doesn't define a season. These kids had potential, real potential, and he was determined to help them see it. The equipment shed sat behind the main building, next to the practice field where the team would soon be running drills. It was a simple metal building, painted the same school colors as everything else on campus. Inside were helmets, shoulder pads, footballs, cones, and all the other gear needed to turn a group of teenagers into a functioning football team. He had just inserted his key into the lock when he heard a car door slam behind him. That was odd. It was still early, and parents usually didn't start dropping off players for another 20 minutes. He turned around and saw a police car parked near the school entrance. A tall officer was walking toward him with quick, determined steps. "Coach." Robinson felt a small knot form in his stomach, but he pushed it away. Probably just a routine check, he told himself. The police sometimes drove through the school grounds on weekends, making sure everything was secure. He had seen them before, usually just waving as they drove by. This officer, though, wasn't waving. His face was serious, almost angry. The morning air was crisp and cool, typical for October in their small town. Coach Robinson could hear birds chirping in the trees that lined the school property. In a few minutes, this peaceful scene would be filled with the sounds of teenage boys laughing, shouting, and practicing the sport they all loved. But right now, it was just him, the officer, and an uncomfortable silence. Officer Mitchell had been driving his usual patrol route when the call came in. "Suspicious person at Lincoln High School," the dispatcher had said. "Caller reports a black male trying to break into the building." The description was vague, but in his mind he had already formed a picture. Probably some troublemaker, maybe. Someone looking to steal equipment or vandalize the school. He had been a police officer for 12 years, and in his experience these calls usually meant exactly what they sounded like. Someone who didn't belong was trying to get into somewhere they shouldn't be. The fact that it was a school made it even more serious in his mind. Schools were supposed to be safe places, and anyone trying to break in was a threat to that safety. As he approached the man by the equipment shed, Officer Mitchell noticed several things. The man was well dressed in coaching gear, he had keys in his hand, and he moved with the confidence of someone who belonged there. But the call had been specific, and Mitchell had learned not to let appearances fool him. Sometimes the most dangerous people looked the most innocent. Meanwhile, the first parent was just pulling into the parking lot. Mrs. Johnson always arrived early to drop off her son Tyler. She liked to make sure he had everything he needed before practice, and she enjoyed chatting with the other parents who gradually showed up. As she parked her car, she noticed the police vehicle and felt a moment of concern. Was something wrong at the school? Tyler grabbed his gear bag from the back seat and started walking toward the field. He could see Coach Robinson by the equipment shed talking to a police officer. That was strange. Coach never had any trouble, and Tyler couldn't imagine why a cop would need to talk to him. The coach was probably the most respected person in their whole town. Back by the shed, the conversation was just beginning. Officer Mitchell had reached the coach and was standing about 10 feet away, his hand resting casually on his belt. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pavement between them. Coach Robinson had dealt with law enforcement before, usually at community events or school functions. He always tried to be respectful and cooperative. Police officers had a difficult job, and he understood that. But something about this officer's approach made him uneasy. There was a tension in the air that didn't feel right. The school grounds were still mostly empty, but that would change soon. By 8 a.m., there would be 30 young men here for practice, along with their parents dropping them off and picking them up. This was supposed to be a safe space, a place where kids could learn and grow and chase their dreams of maybe playing college football someday. Coach Robinson had played college football himself back in the day. That's how he ended up in coaching. Wanting to give back to the next generation, he remembered what it felt like to have a coach who believed in you, who pushed you to be better than you thought you could be. That's what he tried to be for his players now. The keys felt heavy in his hand as he stood there, waiting to see what the officer wanted. These weren't just any keys. They represented trust. The school had given them to him because they knew he would take care of this place, because they knew he belonged here. Every key had a purpose. Every key opened something he was supposed to have access to. Mrs. Johnson finished locking her car and started walking toward the field. Tyler beside her, she could see that more parents were beginning to arrive. The Martinez family was just pulling in, followed by the Thompsons' truck. Soon there would be a small crowd of families here, all supporting their kids and their team. The equipment shed stood silent and locked, waiting for practice to begin. Inside were the tools of the trade, the helmets that would protect young heads, the balls that would fly through the air, the cones that would mark boundaries and create obstacles to overcome. Everything was organized and ready, just waiting for the coach to open the door and begin another day of teaching and learning. This was supposed to be simple. Open the shed, set up the equipment, wait for the team to arrive, and start practice. It was a routine that had been repeated hundreds of times before. But as Officer Mitchell approached with his serious expression and official demeanor, Coach Robinson realized that this Saturday morning was going to be anything but routine. Officer Mitchell stopped about 8 feet away from Coach Robinson, his boots making a scraping sound against the concrete. The morning was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic from the main road and the soft chirping of birds in the oak trees that surrounded the school grounds. What should have been a peaceful moment was quickly turning into something else entirely. "Good morning, officer," Coach Robinson said, trying to keep his voice calm and friendly. He had learned long ago that staying respectful was always the best approach, even when he didn't understand what was happening. The keys were still in his hand, halfway to the lock on the equipment shed door. Officer Mitchell didn't return the greeting. Instead, his eyes narrowed as he looked Coach Robinson up and down, taking in every detail. The coach was wearing a Lincoln High School polo shirt with the school logo clearly visible on the chest. His khaki pants were clean and pressed, and his sneakers looked like they had seen plenty of use on practice fields. Everything about him suggested he belonged exactly where he was, but the call had been clear. Someone had reported suspicious activity, and Mitchell had learned to trust those calls. People didn't usually call the police unless they saw something that worried them. His job was to investigate, not to make assumptions based on how someone looked or dressed. "I need to see some identification," Mitchell said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "And I need to know what you're doing." Here, Coach Robinson felt his heart rate increase slightly, but he kept his expression calm. This wasn't the first time he had been asked these questions in situations where he felt they shouldn't need to be asked. He slowly reached into his back pocket, moving deliberately so the officer could see exactly what he was doing. "I'm the football coach here," he explained, pulling out his wallet. "We have practice this morning at 8 o'clock. I'm just opening up the equipment shed to get ready for the team." He handed over his driver's license along with his school identification card that clearly showed his photo and his title as head football coach. The school ID even had the same logo that was on his shirt, making it obvious that he was exactly who he said he was, Mitchell took the IDs but barely glanced at them before looking back at Coach Robinson with suspicion. How do I know these are real? Anyone can get fake IDs made these days. The comment hit Coach Robinson like a slap. In all his years of coaching, in all his interactions with law enforcement at school events and community functions, no one had ever questioned whether his identification was legitimate. He was well known in this town, respected by parents, loved by students, and trusted by the school administration. "Officer, I've been coaching here for 8 years," he said, his voice still steady despite the growing knot in his stomach. "You can call the school office if you need verification. Principal Davis has my contact information, and so does the athletic director." But Mitchell wasn't interested in making phone calls. He was focused on the fact that someone had called in suspicious activity, and he was determined to get to the bottom of it. In his mind, people who belonged somewhere didn't usually generate calls to 911. If this man was really supposed to be here, why would someone report him? By now, more parents were arriving in the parking lot. Mrs. Chun had just pulled up in her silver minivan, and she could see the police car near the equipment shed. Her son Kevin was in the passenger seat, already dressed in his practice gear and eager to get on the field. But something about the scene ahead of them made her hesitate before getting out of the car. "Mom, why is there a cop talking to Coach Robinson?" Kevin asked, pressing his face against the window to get a better look. Mrs. Chun didn't have an answer. She had known Coach Robinson for 3 years, ever since Kevin made the team. He was one of the most professional, dedicated people she had ever met. He showed up early for every practice, stayed late to help struggling players, and always made sure the boys were not just better athletes but better young men. Over by the shed, the conversation was getting more tense. Officer Mitchell had put the IDs in his shirt pocket without really examining them closely. His focus was on what he saw as inconsistencies in the coach's story. "If you're really supposed to be here, why did someone call and report you as suspicious?" Mitchell asked, taking a step closer. "Seems to me that if you belonged here, people would know that." Coach Robinson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool morning air. He had faced this kind of questioning before, though never at his workplace, never in front of his students' families. The implication was clear. Someone had seen him, a black man with keys, approaching a school building, and automatically assumed he was up to no good. "I don't know who called or why," he said honestly, "but I can show you that these keys work. I can show you my name on the door of my office. I can introduce you to parents who've known me for years." As if on cue, Tyler came jogging over from his mother's car, his equipment bag bouncing against his hip. He was one of the team captains, a senior who had been playing for Coach Robinson since he was a freshman. "Hey, Coach," Tyler called out cheerfully, not immediately noticing the tension in the air. "Are we setting up for practice? I can help carry the equipment out to the field." Officer Mitchell turned sharply toward the teenager, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio. "Stay back, son. This is police business." Tyler stopped in his tracks, confusion written all over his face. He looked from the officer to his coach, trying to understand what was happening. Coach Robinson was like a second father to him, someone who had helped him through tough times both on and off the field. Seeing him being questioned by police didn't make any sense. "But that's Coach Robinson," Tyler said, his voice smaller now. "He's supposed to be here. We always have practice on Saturday mornings." Mitchell ignored the boy's words. In his experience, people sometimes coached kids they weren't supposed to be around. The fact that this teenager knew the man didn't necessarily prove anything about whether he belonged at the school. More parents were getting out of their cars now, sensing that something was wrong. Mr. Williams had arrived with his twin sons, both linebackers on the team. Mrs. Rodriguez was walking across the parking lot with her daughter, who helped with equipment management. They could all see their beloved coach being questioned by a police officer, and none of them understood why Coach Robinson could feel the eyes of the community on him. These were families who trusted him with their children, who had welcomed him into their lives, who celebrated with him when the team won and supported him when they lost. Now they were watching him be treated like a criminal on the very grounds where he had given 8 years of his life. "Officer, please," he said, his voice still respectful but with an edge of frustration creeping in. I have 30 young men who will be here in the next few minutes expecting to practice. Their parents are here dropping them off. Everyone knows. This is my job, my career, my life. But Mitchell was not swayed by the growing crowd or the coach's explanations. He had been called to investigate suspicious activity, and until he was satisfied that there was no threat, he was going to continue his investigation. The fact that more people were arriving only made him more concerned about potential security risks. The morning sun was getting higher now, casting shorter shadows across the school grounds. What should have been a routine Saturday morning was turning into something that everyone present would remember for a very long time. And it was only just beginning. Mrs. Lopez had just finished helping her son Danny get his equipment out of the trunk when she noticed the crowd forming near the equipment shed. Something about the scene made her stomach turn. She had been bringing Danny to practices for 2 years now, and she had never seen a police officer questioning Coach Robinson before. "Mom, what's going on?" Danny asked, slinging his shoulder pads over his arm. He was 15 years old and had looked up to Coach Robinson since joining the team. The coach had helped him improve not just his game, but his grades too, always, reminding the players that school came first. "I don't know, honey," Mrs. Lopez said, but she was already reaching for her phone. Her instincts told her that whatever was happening wasn't right. She had seen enough news stories to know that sometimes things could go very wrong very quickly, especially when people made assumptions based on skin color rather than facts. "Officer." Mitchell's voice was getting louder now, and his posture was becoming more aggressive. He had moved closer to Coach Robinson, close enough that the coach had to take a step back toward the equipment shed. The morning air felt thick with tension, and the birds that had been singing earlier seemed to have gone quiet. "I'm going to need you to put your hands behind your back," Mitchell announced, reaching for his handcuffs. "I'm investigating a possible break-in, and until I can verify your story, you're being detained." Coach Robinson felt the world shift around him. In all his years of living in this community, working at this school, building relationships with these families, he had never imagined he would be handcuffed in front of his students. The keys to the equipment shed were still in his hand, keys that proved he belonged here, keys that the school had given him because they trusted him completely. "Officer, please," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "I'm showing you my school ID. I have keys to the building." "There. Our parents here who know me, you don't need to do this." But Mitchell was already moving forward with the handcuffs. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back, now." That's when Mrs. Lopez lifted her phone and started recording. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she kept the camera steady, making sure to capture everything that was happening. She had never done anything like this before, but something deep inside told her this moment needed to be documented. "I'm recording this," she called out, loud enough for the officer to hear. "Everyone should record this." Her words seemed to break a spell. Suddenly, other parents were reaching for their phones too. Mr. Peterson, whose son played quarterback, started filming from near his pickup truck. Mrs. Jackson, who always brought homemade cookies for the team, pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. Even some of the teenage players who had arrived early were recording, though they tried to be discreet about it. Tyler, the team captain who had tried to greet his coach earlier, was standing frozen about 20 feet away. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Coach Robinson was the most respected man he knew, someone who had taught him about integrity, hard work, and treating people with respect. Watching him be handcuffed like a criminal made Tyler's chest feel tight and his eyes burn with tears he was trying not to shed. "This is wrong," Tyler said, his voice cracking. "This is so wrong. He's our coach. He's supposed to be here." Officer Mitchell heard the boy but didn't look at him. He was focused on securing the handcuffs around Coach Robinson's wrists, making sure they were tight enough that the coach couldn't slip out of them. In his mind, he was just doing his job, following procedure for investigating suspicious activity. Coach Robinson felt the cold metal against his skin and tried to stay calm. He knew that how he handled this moment would affect not just him, but his players, their families, and the entire school community. These kids were watching their coach, their role model, being treated like a criminal, and he needed to show them how to respond with dignity even in the face of injustice. "It's okay," he said, speaking loud enough for his players to hear. "Stay calm, everyone. This is a misunderstanding and we'll get it sorted out." But Mrs. Lopez was not staying calm. She was recording everything and narrating what she was seeing. "This is Coach Robinson from Lincoln High School being handcuffed by a police officer on school property where he works," she said into her phone. "He has his school ID, he has keys to the building, and this officer is arresting him anyway." More cars were pulling into the parking lot now. Parents who were running a few minutes late for drop-off were arriving to find their community in chaos. Mrs. Foster, whose son had been struggling with his grades until Coach Robinson started tutoring him after practice, got out of her car and immediately saw what was happening. "What in the world?" she said, rushing toward the crowd. "That's Coach Robinson. Why is he being arrested?" "Nobody knows," said Mr. Chun, who had arrived a few minutes earlier with his son Kevin. "The officer says someone called in suspicious activity, but Coach has his ID and everything." Mrs. Foster immediately pulled out her phone and started recording too. She had watched Coach Robinson transform her son from a struggling student into a confident young man who now talked about going to college. The idea that anyone would see this wonderful man as suspicious made her angry in a way she hadn't felt in years. The phones were everywhere now, capturing the scene from multiple angles. Some parents were recording video, others were taking photos, and a few were even live streaming on social media. The hashtag Coach Robinson was already starting to appear in posts. Along with Justice for Coach and Lincoln High School. Coach Robinson could see the phones and cameras, and part of him felt embarrassed to be recorded in handcuffs. But another part of him was grateful. He knew that without these recordings, it would be his word against the officer's word about what had happened here. The cameras meant that the truth would be preserved, whatever that truth turned out to be. Danny Lopez was standing next to his mother, watching her record the scene. At 15, he was old enough to understand what was really happening here. This wasn't about suspicious activity or broken protocols. This was about assumptions and prejudice, about someone seeing a black man with keys to a building and automatically thinking he didn't belong there. "Mom, are you really going to post this online?" he asked quietly. "I'm going to make sure everyone sees what happened here today," Mrs. Lopez replied, her voice firm with determination. "Coach Robinson deserves better than this, and people need to know." The crowd was growing larger as more families arrived for practice. Soon there were nearly 20 parents and a dozen players standing around, all of them confused, angry, and increasingly vocal about what they were witnessing. Their phones were like digital witnesses, capturing not just what was happening to Coach Robinson, but the community's reaction to it. Officer Mitchell was beginning to feel uncomfortable with all the attention. He had expected this to be a simple investigation. Check out the suspicious person, determine there was no threat, and move on to the next call. He hadn't expected to find himself in the middle of what felt like a community uprising, with cameras recording his every move and voices getting louder around him. But he had already committed to this course of action. He had put the handcuffs on, and now he felt like he had to follow through, even though the evidence was mounting that Coach Robinson was exactly who he said he was. Sometimes Mitchell thought you just had to stick to procedure, even when it was uncomfortable. The parking lot of Lincoln High School had turned into something nobody expected on what was supposed to be a normal Saturday morning. Cars kept arriving as word spread through text messages and phone calls. Parents who weren't even dropping off kids for practice were showing up after hearing from neighbors and friends that something terrible was happening to Coach Robinson. Mrs. Kim had just gotten the text from her sister while she was having coffee at home. "Come to the school. Now, they're arresting Coach Robinson for no reason." She threw on her jacket and drove over as fast as she could. Her son had graduated 3 years ago, but Coach Robinson had been such an important part of his life that she still considered the Coach family. When she arrived and saw the handcuffs, saw the phones recording, saw the crowd of upset parents and confused teenagers, She felt like she might be sick. This was the man who had helped her son get a scholarship to college, who had driven him to the hospital when he got hurt during practice, who had sat in their living room helping with college applications. "This is insane," she said to Mrs. Foster, who was still recording everything on her phone. "How can this be happening?" Meanwhile, the videos and photos were already spreading beyond the immediate crowd. Parents were sharing them on Facebook, posting them on Twitter, sending them through group chats. The Lincoln High School Parent Network had over 200 members, and messages were flying back and forth as people tried to understand what was happening. Principal Davis was at home, enjoying a quiet Saturday morning with her newspaper and coffee, when her phone started buzzing non-stop. First it was a text from Mrs. Rodriguez. "Emergency at school, Coach Robinson arrested." Then her phone rang. It was Mrs. Chun speaking, so fast that Davis could barely understand her. "You need to get to school right now," Mrs. Chun said, her voice shaking. "There's a police officer who has Coach Robinson in handcuffs, and he won't listen to anyone. He says someone reported suspicious activity, but we all know Coach belongs here." Principal Davis felt her heart sink. She had worked with Coach Robinson for 8 years, had hired him herself when she first became principal. He was one of the most dedicated, professional staff members she had ever known. The idea that someone would call him suspicious made her angry and sad at the same time. "I'm on my way," she told Mrs. Chun. "Don't let anyone leave. Keep recording everything." Back at the school, Officer Mitchell was starting to realize that this situation was spiraling beyond his control. What had started as a routine call was now being documented by dozens of phones, and the crowd was getting larger and more vocal by the minute. He could hear people talking about posting videos online, about calling the news, about demanding answers from the police department. Coach Robinson stood quietly in the handcuffs, his dignity intact despite the humiliating situation. He could see his players watching him, and he knew this moment would stay with them forever. These young men looked up to him, and how he handled this crisis would teach them something about how to face injustice with grace. "Coach, we know you didn't do anything wrong," called out Alex, a junior who played defensive end. His voice was shaky and he looked like he was fighting back tears. "This is crazy." Several other players nodded and voiced their agreement. These teenagers were watching their role model being treated like a criminal, and they couldn't understand why. Some of them had their own phones out, recording and sending videos to friends who weren't there. The social media posts were multiplying rapidly. #Justice for Coach Robinson was starting to trend locally, and the videos were being shared by people who had never even heard of Lincoln High School. Comments were pouring in from parents, former students, teachers, and community members who knew Coach Robinson and couldn't believe what they were seeing. "This man changed my son's life," wrote one parent on Facebook. "He taught him responsibility, respect, and hard work. Anyone who knows Coach Robinson knows this is wrong." "I played for Coach 8 years ago," posted a former student who was now in college. "He's the reason I graduated, the reason I'm in school now. This is heartbreaking." The local news stations were starting to take notice too. Channel 7's Weekend Assignment Desk got their first tip about the story from a viewer who had seen the videos on social media. By 8:30 a.m., they had a reporter and camera crew heading to Lincoln High School. Mrs. Thompson had arrived at the school and immediately started recording on her phone while calling her husband, who was a lawyer. "You need to see this," she told him over the phone. "They've got Coach Robinson in handcuffs for absolutely no reason. Everyone here knows him. He has his school ID, he has keys, and this officer won't listen to anyone." Her husband could hear the anger and frustration in her voice. He had met Coach Robinson at several school events and had always been impressed by the man's character and dedication. "Keep recording," he told his wife. "Document everything. This isn't right." The crowd had grown to nearly 40 people now, with more arriving every few minutes. Some were parents of current players, others were parents of former players, and some were just community members who had heard what was happening and came to show support. The school parking lot looked like a community rally, except everyone was upset and confused instead of celebrating. Officer Mitchell's radio crackled to life. His supervisor's voice came through, asking for a status update on his location. Mitchell looked around at all the phones pointed at him, at all the angry faces, at the coach standing calmly in handcuffs, and he realized he might need backup. "I've got a situation at Lincoln High School," he reported into his radio. "Large crowd gathering, may need additional units." The response came back quickly. "What's the nature of the situation?" Mitchell hesitated. How could he explain that he had handcuffed a school employee in front of dozens of community members who all seemed to know and respect the man? How could he justify continuing to detain someone when the evidence clearly showed he belonged exactly where he was? "Suspicious person call that's gotten complicated." He finally said. Coach Robinson heard the radio conversation and felt a chill. The last thing he wanted was for more police officers to arrive and make this situation even worse. He could see the fear in his players' eyes, could feel the tension radiating from the parents who were watching. If more officers showed up, if this escalated further, someone could get hurt. "Officer Mitchell," he said quietly, using the name he had seen on the man's badge. "I know this is difficult, but please don't call for backup. These are good people. They're just worried about someone they care about. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be." But Mitchell had already made the call, and he could hear sirens in the distance. The situation was about to get much more complicated, and everyone present could sense it. Parents pulled their children closer, phones kept recording, and the peaceful Saturday morning at Lincoln High School continued to transform into something that would change their community forever. The videos from the parking lot were now being watched by thousands of people across the city and beyond. Local Facebook groups were sharing them, Twitter users were retweeting them, and news outlets were starting to pick up the story. What had started as one officer responding to one call was becoming a public incident that would demand answers from everyone involved. Principal Davis's car screeched into the parking lot just as two more police cruisers were arriving with their sirens wailing. The sound cut through the morning air like a knife, making everyone's heart race faster. She jumped out of her car. Before it was fully stopped, her keys still in her hand and her coffee mug forgotten on the passenger seat, the scene that greeted her was like something from a nightmare. Her most trusted coach was standing in handcuffs surrounded by dozens of parents, students, and community members, all of them recording with their phones and shouting questions that nobody was answering. This was supposed to be a quiet Saturday morning at her school, not a crisis that was spiraling out of control. "What is going on here?" Principal Davis demanded, pushing through the crowd toward Officer Mitchell. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had been running schools for 15 years, someone who was used to solving problems and protecting her staff and students. Officer Mitchell turned toward her, relief visible on his face. Finally, someone official from the school who could help sort this mess out. "Are you the principal?" he asked. "I am Principal Davis, and this is my school," she said firmly. "Why do you have my football coach in handcuffs?" Mitchell pulled out the IDs he had taken from Coach Robinson earlier. "Someone called in suspicious activity. This man was trying to break into the building. I need you to verify these identification cards." Principal Davis looked at the IDs and then looked at Officer Mitchell like he had lost his mind. "This is Coach Robinson. He's worked here for 8 years. I hired him myself. These are his real IDs because this is his real job at my real school." She held up her phone and opened the school's website, scrolling to the athletics page. There was Coach Robinson's photo, clear as day, with his title and a biography describing his 8 years of service to Lincoln High School. She showed the screen to Officer Mitchell, her frustration growing by the second. "Here he is on our official website," she said. "Here's his office key on my key ring because I gave it to him. Here are 30 parents and students who know him personally. What more proof do you need?" But Officer Mitchell seemed determined to follow through with what he had started. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was procedure, or maybe he simply couldn't admit that he had made a huge mistake in front of all these people and all these cameras. Whatever the reason, he wasn't backing down. "I still need to verify everything at the station," he said. "Proper protocol requires that I complete the investigation, The crowd erupted in angry voices. Parents who had been trying to stay calm were losing their patience. These were people who trusted Coach Robinson with their children, who had watched him shape young lives for years, who considered him part of their extended family. "This is ridiculous," shouted Mrs. Wilson, whose son had graduated the year before. "You have the principal herself telling you who he is. Let him go," called out Mr. Garcia, who was recording everything on his phone. "You can see he belongs." "Here." Coach Robinson felt the anger building around him and knew he had to try to keep everyone calm. The last thing he wanted was for someone to get arrested for defending him or for a student to get hurt in the chaos. He turned toward his players, who were standing together in a tight group, their faces showing confusion and pain. "Listen to me," he said, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "I need you all to stay calm. I need you to be smart about this. Don't give anyone a reason to escalate this situation." Tyler stepped forward, tears streaming down his face. "Coach, this isn't right. Everyone knows you. Everyone loves you. How can they do this?" "Sometimes life isn't fair," Coach Robinson said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "But how we handle unfairness shows who we really are. I need you to remember that." Officer Mitchell's backup had arrived, and now there were 3 police cars in the parking lot. The other officers were trying to understand the situation, looking confused by the large crowd of upset community members surrounding what was supposed to be a simple suspicious person call. "We're taking him in for questioning," Mitchell announced to the crowd. "Everyone needs to step back and let us do our job." The announcement hit the crowd like a physical blow. Parents gasped, students started crying harder, and the phones recording everything captured the shock and disbelief on everyone's faces. This was really happening. Their beloved coach was really being arrested for the crime of being a black man with keys to his own workplace. Mrs. Lopez, who had been recording since the beginning, stepped closer to make sure her camera captured everything clearly. "This is wrong," she said into her phone, narrating for everyone who would watch the video later. "They're arresting an innocent man who was doing his job at his own workplace." Principal Davis wasn't giving up. She pulled out her phone and started making calls. First to the superintendent's office, then to the school board president, then to the mayor's office. Someone with authority needed to stop this before it went any further. "I'm calling everyone I can think of," she told the crowd. "This stops here." But Officer Mitchell was already walking Coach Robinson toward his patrol car. Each step felt like an eternity to everyone watching. The coach moved with dignity, his head held high, but everyone could see the pain in his eyes. This was a man who had dedicated his life to serving young people, and he was being treated like a criminal in front of the very students he had worked so hard to inspire. The football team walked alongside their coach as far as they could, their cleats making scraping sounds on the asphalt. Some of them were crying openly now, not caring who saw their tears. These were tough teenage boys who had been taught by their coach to be strong, but watching their role model being arrested was breaking their hearts. "We love you, Coach," called out Danny, his voice cracking with emotion. "We know you didn't do anything wrong. Everyone knows you're innocent," added Kevin, walking as close to the police car as the officers would allow. Coach Robinson looked at his team one more time before getting into the back of the patrol car. These boys meant everything to him. They were the reason he got up early every Saturday morning, the reason he stayed late after practice to help with homework, the reason he had dedicated his career to education and athletics. "Keep working hard," he told them. "Keep being good. Young men, I'll be back." The patrol car doors slammed shut with a sound that seemed to echo across the entire parking lot. Through the windows, everyone could see Coach Robinson sitting in the back seat, his hands still cuffed behind him, his school polo shirt wrinkled from the morning's events. Principal Davis was shouting into her phone, trying to reach someone. Who could stop this madness? Parents were calling lawyers, calling news stations, calling anyone they thought might be able to help. The social media posts were multiplying by the minute, with videos of the arrest being shared across every platform. As the police car pulled out of the parking lot, several parents jumped into their own cars to follow. They weren't going to let Coach Robinson face this alone. Mrs. Thompson called her lawyer husband to meet them at the police station. Mr. Peterson called his brother, who was a reporter at the local newspaper. The football team stood in the parking lot watching their coach disappear down the street, their Saturday morning practice forgotten, their faith in fairness and justice shaken to its core. They had learned a hard lesson about how the world sometimes treats good people, and it was a lesson they would never forget. The ride to the police station took only 12 minutes, but for Coach Robinson sitting in the back of the patrol car, it felt like hours. He watched familiar streets pass by through the window, the coffee shop where he sometimes grabbed breakfast before early practices, the park where he jogged on weekends, the library where he had helped several of his players with college applications. This was his community, his home, and now he was seeing it from the back of a police car like a criminal. Officer Mitchell drove in silence, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror at his passenger. The radio chatter was constant now, with dispatchers trying to figure out what was happening at Lincoln High School and why so many people were calling the station asking about an arrest. Mitchell was starting to realize that this simple suspicious person call had turned into something much bigger than he had expected. Behind them, a small convoy of cars followed. Mrs. Thompson was in the lead, talking rapidly on her phone to her lawyer husband, who was already heading to the station. Mr. Peterson was right behind her, live streaming the drive on Facebook for anyone who wanted to follow what was happening. Mrs. Lopez was in the third car, still recording everything she could while her friend drove. At the police station, Sergeant Williams was having a confusing morning. Her phone had been ringing nonstop with calls from angry parents, school officials, and even some reporters asking about an arrest at Lincoln High School. She had pulled up the call log and saw that Officer Mitchell had responded to a suspicious person report, but nothing in the paperwork explained why the entire community seemed to be in an uproar. When Mitchell's patrol car pulled into the station parking lot, followed by several civilian vehicles, Sergeant Williams went outside to see what was happening. She watched as Mitchell opened the back door and helped a well-dressed black man in handcuffs step out of the car. The man moved with dignity despite his situation, and something about the whole scene felt wrong to her. "Mitchell, what's going on here?" she asked as they approached the building. "Suspicious person call at the high school," Mitchell replied, but his voice lacked confidence. "Got a report of someone trying to break into the building." Sergeant Williams looked at the man in handcuffs, then at the crowd of people getting out of cars in the parking lot, then back at Mitchell. "And who is this person supposed to be?" "He claims he's a football coach at the school," Mitchell said. "Has some ID, but I need to verify everything." Coach Robinson looked at Sergeant Williams and spoke for the first time since leaving the school. "Ma'am, I am the head football coach at Lincoln High School. I was opening the equipment shed for Saturday practice when Officer Mitchell detained me. I have my school ID, my keys to the building, and there are dozens of people who can vouch for me." Something in his tone, his bearing, and his words made Sergeant Williams take a closer look at the situation. She had been a police officer for 18 years, and she had developed good instincts about people. This man didn't look, sound, or act like someone who had been caught breaking into a building. Meanwhile, inside the station, Detective Carter was at his computer when he started getting notifications on his phone. His daughter, who was a sophomore at Lincoln High School, was texting him frantically. "Dad, they arrested Coach Robinson. Everyone's posting videos. This is crazy. He's the best coach ever." Detective Carter frowned and opened his social media apps. His feed was flooded with videos from the high school parking lot. He watched several clips of a police officer handcuffing a man in a school polo shirt, while dozens of parents and students protested. The hashtag Justice for Coach Robinson was everywhere, along with posts from people saying they knew the coach personally and couldn't believe what they were seeing. "Johnson," he called to another detective across the room, "come look at this. I think we've got a problem." Detective Johnson walked over and watched the videos over Carter's shoulder. "Oh no," he said quietly. "Tell me Mitchell didn't arrest someone's football coach for being at his own school." "That's exactly what it looks like," Carter replied, scrolling through more posts. My daughter knows this guy. Says he's been coaching there for years, everyone. Loves him. Outside, the crowd from the school parking lot was growing. More parents had arrived after hearing about the arrest through phone calls and social media. Several former students had rushed over after seeing the videos online, including young adults who had played for Coach Robinson years earlier and still considered him a mentor. Mrs. Chun was on her phone with Channel 7 News, giving them details about what had happened. Yes, they arrested our football coach for no reason, she was saying. He has worked at the school for 8 years. Everyone knows him. This is discrimination, plain and simple. The local news stations were scrambling to get crews to the police station. The story was spreading fast on social media, and editors were realizing this could be a big story about police misconduct and racial profiling. The videos from the school parking lot had already been viewed thousands of times, and the comments were overwhelmingly supportive of Coach Robinson. Inside the station, Sergeant Williams was making phone calls. First, she called the high school directly and spoke to Principal Davis, who was still at the school dealing with the aftermath of the arrest. Is Coach Robinson supposed to be at your school this morning? Williams asked. Of course he is, Principal. Davis replied, her voice tight with anger. He has Saturday practice every week. He's been doing this for 8 years. I gave him those keys myself. This is absolutely ridiculous. Next, Williams called the school district office and spoke to the athletic director, who confirmed everything Principal Davis had said. Coach Robinson was not only supposed to be at the school, he was required to be there as part of his job duties. The verification took exactly 7 minutes. 7 minutes to confirm what everyone at the school had been trying to tell Officer Mitchell from the beginning. Coach Robinson was exactly who he said he was exactly where he was supposed to be, and there had never been any reason to arrest him. By the time Sergeant Williams walked back outside to talk to Mitchell, the videos from the school had been shared over 10,000 times. Local Facebook groups were buzzing with outrage, Twitter users were demanding justice, and even people in other cities were commenting on the story after seeing it shared by friends. Mitchell, Williams said quietly, pulling him aside. We need to release this man immediately. He's exactly who he says he is. The school confirms everything. Mitchell's face went pale. But the call said suspicious activity. The call was wrong, Williams said firmly. Or maybe the caller was wrong. Either way, this man is innocent, and we just arrested a respected community member for doing his job. Coach Robinson was sitting in a holding area, still in handcuffs, when Sergeant Williams approached him. Sir, I apologize for this situation. We verified your identity and your right to be at the school. You're free to go. As the handcuffs came off, Coach Robinson rubbed his wrists and tried to process what had just happened. In less than 2 hours, he had gone from preparing for football practice to being arrested and released. All while his community watched and recorded everything. Outside, the crowd had grown to nearly 60 people. When the station doors opened and Coach Robinson walked out as a free man, the cheers could be heard 3 blocks away. But even though he was free, everyone knew that this was far from over. The videos were still spreading, the questions were still unanswered, and the community was still demanding to know how something like this could have happened to such a good man. The cheers outside the police station were loud, but Coach Robinson didn't feel like celebrating. He stood on the steps of the building, looking out at the sea of familiar faces, parents who had trusted him with their children, former students who had driven across town to support him, and community members who barely knew him but understood that what had happened was wrong. Mrs. Thompson rushed forward and gave him a hug, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry this happened to you, she said. My husband is on his way. We're going to make sure this never happens to anyone else. Coach Robinson hugged her back, grateful for the support but still processing the morning's events. 2 hours ago, he had been getting ready for football practice. Now he was standing outside a police station surrounded by news cameras and dozens of people holding phones, all because someone had decided he looked suspicious while doing his job. The local news crews had arrived in force. Channel 7's reporter Kelly Morgan was setting up for a live broadcast while her cameraman tested the equipment. Channel 12 was interviewing parents who had witnessed the arrest, and the newspaper photographer was capturing images of the crowd and their signs that read "Justice for Coach Robinson" and "We Stand with Coach." Detective Carter came outside and approached Coach Robinson quietly. "Sir, I want you to know that not all of us agree with what happened here today. My daughter plays on the girls' soccer team at Lincoln. She's told me about you, about how you help all the student athletes, not just your own players." Coach Robinson shook the detective's hand. "I appreciate that. I know there are good officers out there. This morning was just difficult." Inside the police station, chaos was brewing. The phones hadn't stopped ringing since the videos started spreading online. Chief Patterson had been called in from his weekend off and was now sitting in his office trying to understand how a simple suspicious person call had turned into a public relations nightmare. "How many views are we up to now?" he asked his assistant, who was monitoring social media. "The main video has over 50,000 shares on Facebook alone," she replied. "Twitter is even worse. The hashtag is trending statewide now. And the local news stations are all running with the story." Chief Patterson rubbed his temples. He had seen the videos himself, and there was no way to spin this positively. A respected community member had been arrested for the crime of being black at his own workplace, despite having identification and keys that prove he belonged there. The optics were terrible, and the community was rightfully outraged. Meanwhile, back at Lincoln High School, the football team was still gathered in the parking lot. Practice had been canceled, but none of the players wanted to go home. They were all on their phones, sharing the videos and trying to process what they had witnessed. Tyler, the team captain, was being interviewed by a reporter from the school newspaper who had rushed to campus when she heard what happened. "Coach Robinson is like a father to all of us," Tyler said, his voice still shaky from crying. "He teaches us about more than football. He teaches us about being good men, about treating people with respect, about standing up for what's right." The school newspaper reporter, Jessica, was only 17 years old, but she knew this was the biggest story she would ever cover. "What do you want people to know about your coach?" she asked. "I want them to know that he's innocent," Tyler replied. "I want them to know that he's one of the best people I've ever met. And I want them to know that what happened today was wrong." At the police station, the press conference was about to begin. Chief Patterson had decided that the best strategy was to address the situation head-on rather than let speculation and anger continue to build. He walked to the podium that had been set up outside the station, facing a crowd of reporters, cameras, and community members. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I want to address the incident that occurred this morning at Lincoln High School involving Coach Robinson and one of our officers." The crowd quieted, everyone straining to hear what the chief would say. Coach Robinson stood with Principal Davis and several school board members, all of them waiting to hear how the police department would explain what had happened. "After a thorough review of the incident," Chief Patterson continued, "it is clear that Coach Robinson was wrongfully detained. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing. The arrest should not have happened." There were murmurs of approval from the crowd, but also shouts of anger. "That's not enough," called out Mrs. Lopez. "What are you going to do about the officer who did this?" Chief Patterson held up his hand for quiet. "Officer Mitchell has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. We are also reviewing our training procedures to ensure that incidents like this do not happen again." The statement was met with mixed reactions. Some people felt it was a good first step, while others thought it was too little, too late. The damage had already been done not just to Coach Robinson, but to the relationship between the police department and the community. Mrs. Kim, whose son had graduated 3 years earlier, stood up and addressed the chief directly. "How do we know this won't happen again? How do we know that other good people won't be treated this way just because of the color of their skin?" It was a question that hung in the air, one that didn't have easy answers. Chief Patterson promised a thorough investigation and policy changes. But everyone knew that real change would take time and effort from everyone involved. The videos continued to spread throughout the day. By evening, they had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. News outlets from neighboring cities picked up the story, and it was shared in Facebook groups and Twitter feeds across the region. The comment sections were filled with people sharing their own experiences with discrimination and expressing support for Coach Robinson. Former Lincoln High School students who now lived in other states were sharing the videos with messages like, "This is my old coach. He's an amazing man who doesn't deserve this. And Coach Robinson changed my life. This is heartbreaking to watch." College recruiters who had worked with Coach Robinson over the years posted messages of support. "One of the most professional, dedicated coaches I've ever worked with," wrote a recruiter from State University. "This man deserves nothing but respect." Local businesses started posting signs of support in their windows. The coffee shop where Coach Robinson sometimes grabbed breakfast put up a sign that read, "We stand with Coach Robinson." The sporting goods store offered to donate equipment to the football team in his honor, but while the community support was overwhelming, the impact on Coach Robinson himself was harder to measure. He had always been a private person, someone who preferred to work behind the scenes helping young people rather than being in the spotlight. Now his face was on screens across the region, and his story was being discussed by thousands of strangers. That evening he sat in his living room with his wife, watching the news coverage of the day's events. "How are you holding up?" she asked, taking his hand. "I keep thinking about the boys," he said quietly. "They watched their coach get arrested for no reason. What does that teach them about justice, about fairness, about how the world sees people who look like us?" It was a conversation happening in homes across the community, as parents tried to explain to their children what they had witnessed and what it meant for their understanding of right and wrong. 3 weeks after the incident at Lincoln High School, the community was still talking about what had happened that Saturday morning. The videos had been viewed over 2 million times across all platforms, and the story had been covered by news outlets in 12 different states. But for Coach Robinson, the real measure of change wasn't in view counts or headlines, it was in the conversations happening in his classroom and on his practice field. The school district had moved quickly to show their support. Superintendent Miller held a special meeting where she publicly apologized to Coach Robinson and announced new partnerships with community organizations to address bias and discrimination. The school board voted unanimously to establish the Robinson Fellowship, a program that would bring guest speakers to talk about social justice and equality to students across the district. Coach Robinson was touched by the gestures, but he was more interested in practical changes. "It's nice to have my name on something," he told Principal Davis during one of their weekly meetings. "But what I really want is for this to never happen to anyone else." The police department's investigation had concluded after 2 weeks. Officer Mitchell was found to have violated department policies regarding proper investigation procedures and community interaction. He was suspended without pay for 30 days and required to complete 40 hours of bias training before returning to duty. Many in the community felt the punishment was too light, but Coach Robinson had publicly asked people to focus on moving forward rather than seeking revenge. "Anger is easy," he had said during a community meeting at the school, "but anger alone doesn't create change. We need to channel that energy into making sure our young people grow up in a better world than the one we inherited." The football team had rallied around their coach in ways that amazed everyone. They had designed and printed T-shirts with "We Stand with Coach Robinson" on the front and "Respect All People" on the back. They wore them to every game for the rest of the season, and other teams started asking where they could get their own shirts. Tyler, the team captain, had become something of a spokesperson for the team. He was interviewed by several news outlets and always emphasized the same message. Coach Robinson had taught them that true strength came from standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. He could have been angry after what happened, Tyler explained to a reporter from the regional newspaper. He could have been bitter or wanted to get back at people. But instead, he used it as a teaching moment. He showed us how to respond to injustice with dignity and purpose, The community support had been overwhelming. Local businesses had raised money to fund new equipment for the football program. The youth center had invited Coach Robinson to speak at their annual fundraising dinner. Churches, civic organizations, and parent groups were all asking him to share his story and his message about turning negative experiences into positive change, but perhaps the most meaningful response had come from an unexpected source, Officer Johnson, a veteran cop who had been with the department for 20 years, had reached out to Coach Robinson privately. He wanted to apologize on behalf of the officers who understood that what had happened was wrong, and he wanted to work together to improve police-community relations. "I've got kids in this district," Officer Johnson had said during their first meeting at a coffee shop downtown. "I want them to grow up trusting the police, but I also want them to feel safe around us. What happened to you made a lot of us realize we need to do better." That conversation had led to something revolutionary for their small town, a community policing program where officers would spend time at schools and community events, not as enforcers but as neighbors. Coach Robinson had volunteered to help design the program, bringing his experience working with young people to help bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community. The program started small, with 2 officers spending time at Lincoln High School during lunch periods, helping with homework, playing basketball with students, and just talking about life. The response was cautious at first. Many students and parents were still hurt and suspicious after what had happened to Coach Robinson. But gradually, relationships began to form. Mrs. Lopez, who had recorded the original incident, became one of the program's biggest supporters. "My son Danny was so angry after what happened to Coach," she explained to other parents. "But now he's seeing that not all police officers are the same. He's learning that we can work together to make things better." The media attention had brought other opportunities too. Coach Robinson was invited to speak at conferences about education, sports, and social justice. A publisher reached out about writing a book about his experience. A documentary filmmaker wanted to follow the team for a full season to show how sports could be a platform for positive change. Coach Robinson was selective about which opportunities he accepted. He didn't want to become famous for being wrongfully arrested. He wanted to be known for the work he had always done, helping young people become better human beings. But he recognized that his story had given him a platform that could be used for good. The football season had been remarkable in ways that had nothing to do with wins and losses. The team played with a passion and unity that impressed everyone who watched them. They had learned something about fighting for more than just touchdowns. They were fighting for the idea that all people deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. At the end of season banquet, Coach Robinson gave a speech that brought tears to many eyes. He talked about how proud he was of his players, not just for their performance on the field, but for how they had handled a difficult situation with maturity and grace. "You could have been angry," he told the room full of players, parents, and community members. "You could have let what happened to me make you bitter or distrustful. Instead, you chose to turn it into something positive. You chose to stand up for what's right while still respecting others. That's the kind of man I always hoped you would become." The incident had changed Coach Robinson in ways he was still discovering. He had always been a private person, but now he understood that sometimes staying quiet wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to speak up, not just for yourself, but for everyone who might face similar treatment in the future. A year later, the changes in the community were visible everywhere. The police department had implemented new training programs that were being studied by other departments across the state. The school district had expanded its diversity and inclusion programs. Local businesses had formed a coalition to promote equality and fair treatment for all community members. Most importantly, a generation of young people had learned a powerful lesson about how to respond to injustice. They had seen their coach treated unfairly, watched their community rally to support him, and participated in efforts to create positive change. They had learned that being a victim of discrimination didn't have to be the end of the story. It could be the beginning of something better. Coach Robinson continued to arrive at school early on, Saturday mornings for football practice, but now, when he opened that equipment shed, He knew that dozens of people were watching, supporting, and working to make sure that what happened to him would never happen to anyone else. The keys in his hand weren't just keys to a building anymore. They were symbols of belonging, acceptance, and the ongoing fight for justice in his community.